My humble respect to Guru Mahan, Guru Piran Sivasangran, Guru Piran Nyo, fellow Jnanis. The last few weeks I've been covering about the science of meditation, particularly we'll see later on Kundalini meditation. And I spoke about how meditation, more specifically introspection, contemplation, reflection, and meditation, uh, has an impact on all of us. Obviously, a lot of the great saints and sages knew about this. As I said, like scientists, they transform their mind and into a laboratory for experimentation. So the scientists have the telescope to gaze the stars, to be able to see, the beginning of the universe. The scientists also have the microscope to see the most minutest thing in this universe. So we as a species have developed tools to see the macrocosm, including the beginning of the universe, which is really amazing, which goes back 13.8 billion years, even way before we existed. We know quite a lot about our universe. That same mind that is peering into the macrocosm of the universe also has developed the tools to go into the microcosm, which is actually the most minutest thing in the universe, which is atom, and even more minute than the atom is the various things like quarks and so on. So this all comes from the human mind. And as how scientists explore the external universe, both the macro and macrocosm and the microcosm, there was a different type of scientists that were emerging, that were exploring this thing called consciousness. That which gives us that ability to understand the macrocosm and the microcosm. So the thinking here is that to really understand everything is happening in the human mind. So these great saints and sages who are like scientists, now instead of using telescope and microscopes, they use something called inner scope. Inner scope is actually nothing but introspection, contemplation, reflection, and meditation. By the way, our telescopes and microscopes emerged from the human mind. In that same way, now they started looking and probing, and trying to understand that which creates the microscope and the telescope, which is the human mind itself. So they started this various practice of this devising methods of what I call inner scope, that is the introspection, contemplation, reflection, and meditation. And as they were doing that, something was happening, that they had better understanding of the universe, both the macro and the micro, but they also had a better understanding of consciousness, existence, and the interrelationship between the human existence and all other existence and the universe, the creator, the creation, and the creation that is probing into the creator. So it's really fascinating as we think very carefully. These great saints and sages like Mahan, and many others that was before him, flipped it back and started looking within. This whole process is called self-discovery or self-realization. As they were doing this, something very interesting that was happening. The mind, the human mind that is constantly, being bombarded by information from the external world, and the mind was continuously in a state of flux. The mind, engaged the world from the time it wakes up until it goes to sleep. Even in sleep, people still have things running in their head in the form of dreams and so on. So these great saints and sages started looking at the mind very carefully and trying to understand what are the processes that generates a thought. First, defining what that thought is. Thought is a measure of experience, and the experiences, why do certain times we experience certain things. So they were able to understand the process of thinking, the thinker, the thinking process, and that which is being taught. So they, like scientists, exploring this. As they were doing that, they had a better understanding of this material universe, better understanding of their own physiology, and better understanding of the strength and the power and the weaknesses of the human mind. And they started then saying, okay, what are the forces that governs the human mind? And they said, okay, let's see whether we can, as how any other forces that we have discovered in the universe, there are forces that influences and impacts the human mind. So they literally put the human mind under a microscope, right? Like not a physical microscope, but their own inner scope. And that process is called introspection, contemplation, reflection, and meditation. When they did that, they really then understood the power of the human mind and the frailties of the human mind. And they realized that what are the forces that governs this and how do we manage these forces. And the whole pursuit of yoga and meditation and all is actually to understand the human mind, understand the forces that govern the human mind, how to manage those forces, and more importantly, how to unlock the power of the human mind to discover the creator, the creative forces, and all the creation, including the human existence. So this is how these great saints and sages, for me, they were like scientists themselves. And in that process of doing this, they realized that when they were intensifying the ICRMS, they were feeling much better. They were feeling more healthier. They were feeling more enlightened and more illumined. And they were actually feeling that impact. And it made them more intensify the meditation that gives them greater clarity of thought, greater, deeper understanding, and that reinforced that meditational process. So there was a circular, framework, a circular impact that one another was having. So they were seeing that intensifying the ICRMS gave them clarity. Clarity gives them better illumination. Better illumination helped them to go deeper. Something then took place that they realized that this meditational process is giving them that insights, giving them the enlightenment, giving them the illumination, giving them the happiness, giving them the universal identity. They knew this. It's all documented in their own scriptures, in their own writings. Some had a better understanding of why this is happening. Others were saying this is happening and this is what you do. So Mahans and other great saints started exploring, why is this happening? Right? Sometimes it's happening, we feel happy, but we don't ask the next question, why am I feeling happy? Is it a placebo effect or is it a real effect? And I started reading this literature a little bit more carefully, and I felt personally myself as I was practicing meditation over the many years, there were micro changes, micro level changes. On a day-to-day, you don't feel it, but over time you feel that you're feeling more happier, you have more clarity of thought, better direction. Slowly over time, things were starting to make sense. So I personally felt it and I said, look, as a scientist myself, there is something happening in me, but I need to understand what this changes that is happening, why these changes are happening. So like the Mahans, Paranjoti Mahan actually documented this in the I God book, his experience. So the I God book is his manual of the enlightenment process. And so did many of the other great saints and sages. Then I said to myself, I am experiencing this, and this is Mahan's experience. He's documenting in his own language. And I said, look, as a scientist, I have all the tools of inquiry, all the research, instrumentation. Why don't I try to make sense of all this? So I can feel the change in me. There's a physiological change. Things were more clearer. I had better stamina. I had better resilience, better mental agility. So something was happening, which I did not understand in the first place. So as a scientist, I had access to all the facilities in the university, people. I started exploring this journey. And voila, something amazing discovery, at least for me, is that as I was reading the scientific literature, talking to brain scientists, talking to the top people in the world in top universities, I stumbled across the literature. There are scientists who were skeptical of this, and they went and learned, and they felt the change, and they put their mind under a microscope and discovered something amazing that the Mahans and the great saints were documenting, maybe not in a scientific language, but they were not trained in that way. They were just writing in the way poetry and everything else. Whatever they knew, they wrote it in that form. You see, Mahan was putting in his own form in the I God book, but sometimes he would write it in a very poetic way. But these scientists were actually documenting why the change is happening, and there was a structural changes that are happening in the brain when you practice this ICRMS, which is all mindfulness. So I stumbled across this literature and the people that were working. I said, now I can put a finger on this thing. Of that change is because there's a structural changes that are happening in the brain. And this is the journey that I took. Okay, let's see what is happening. So I'm feeling and practicing this meditation, the third eye, I'm feeling something, and things were more clearer. Complex things became very, very simple. So this journey of trying to understand the science behind this is to give the foundation for what meditation is and how meditation has an impact on our human life. So this is the journey that I want to talk to you all about, the real effects. Why this is important is for you to know how important meditation is. It is something that we cannot afford not to do because we use our mind every day, every waking moment of our lives. And that software called mind is so important to determine the quality of our life. But that software depends very much on a hardware called the brain and the body. And if we don't look after our brain and our body, we see that the hardware starts malfunctioning. When the hardware starts malfunctioning, the mind is unable to operate efficiently, and the intellect will start becoming blunted. That means it'll dim. The illumination becomes more, less sharper. So here it is and this is true as we age. You see, something very interesting happens is that when we are young, youthful, the hormones are all, fantastic. There's growth hormones, and the brain is, we're eating good food, and, the brain is growing at a rapid pace. We're getting a lot of stimulation. But once you hit 40, 45, 50, the hormone levels are starting to decline. And that is the biology of the human body. And worse still, when you retire at the age of 55 or 60 years old, at least in the office, we have interactions, we're doing things, we're reading, preparing projects, the brain is still functioning. But by the time you're 55 and 60 years old, you see that everything starts declining because we don't even put in the effort for, at least in our work environment. The children are all grown, so there's no responsibility, all those things. So we start coasting. Like any other muscles, the brain, if you don't use it, you start losing it. And you see forgetfulness comes in, our motor coordination changes, our emotional state changes, we feel insecure. All those things starts creeping, very difficult to concentrate. And you see that all this couples together, it creates what I call a polycrisis, multiple crises that comes together, multiple crises, both health, physical health, mental health, emotional state. So it creates a polycrisis in those who are aging and slowly, starting to see all kinds of disease and all kinds of disorders starts manifesting. But observing Mahan, who lived up to 80 years old, and others who were so alert, practicing meditation, intensifying, the brain will age, but meditation helps slow down the aging process. There is something called neurogenesis, which is actually the parts of the brain starts growing and developing even when we are aging. And when that happens, you saw in the previous satsangs, there's a link between parts of your brain and the hormones. I covered this thing called happy hormones, hormones that, gives us inspiration, gives us calmness, peacefulness, happiness. You see that parts of the brains are still firing away, still stimulating the hormones. You still feel alert, you feel happy, you feel inspiration. So I covered this in the previous satsangs, a number of them, 11 of them, in every part of the brains, that if we practice meditation, it stimulates this, and that part of the brain will experience that growth. The dying cells and the growth cells outnumber the dying cells, and you see that you are in a steady state or getting better, even when you're aging, right? So I showed separately each individual impact, but when we collectively, because remember the brain is, for the exercise, I showed step by step, but actually the brain operates like a machine, all of them happening simultaneously. And this, when we don't do anything, parts of your brain start shutting down, and they have a combination effects. So depression, mental disorder, decline in the hormones, all that feedbacks into the health of the body. Health of the body impacts the emotional state. So this is what I call a polycrisis. In that reverse, if we start practicing meditation and mindfulness and being positive and all those things, all parts of the brain starts firing, and there's a reinforcing effect that takes place, that what was a polycrisis, a potential polycrisis, would lead into what I call poly opportunities, and opportunities for us to develop, grow, become enlightened. So a polycrisis to a poly opportunities, right? So this is what I want to show when, I covered this whole idea of this brain and different parts of the brain. I won't go into the details, but I'm going to show you combination-wise, when all of them, when you practice this meditation, your neurotransmitters are really, excellent, relaying the messages, parts of your brain, left and right, are operating really well. Your cognitive ability goes up, ability to concentrate, and the rational thinking becomes more sharper. The pituitary gland, which is the master gland that is impacting all the hormone system and controlling the endocrinal system, now starts operating in a more efficient way. You reduce, all your hormonal imbalances, your limb movement, your understanding, your speech, your visual experience of the world, is not diminishing as you age. It becomes more profound, more, vibrant, your speech, your language. When people speak, you can understand the subtleties. There are non-verbal memories that you develop, which is when you see people, the demeanor, there are subtle things that you learn even without the communication taking place. You understand body languages. This is where the emotional intelligence comes in. And the same thing when you see your dog, you know exactly what he's trying to communicate. The same thing you see your movements improve, all your, the limbic system operates very well, which is impacting your fear and anxiety, and all those things start slowly diminishing, right? And the beautiful thing is that as we age, the brain stem becomes more stronger, the nerves become stronger, the muscles there is much more harmonized. You see that the connection between the brain signals and the spinal cord becomes, you know, operating at a very optimal level. Some people, you see that when they age, when they don't do anything, when they don't practice meditation or yoga or exercises, you see parts of the nerves starts, you know, getting, all kinds of issues and blockages and so on. And you see that people have suffered back problems, you know, and you see sometimes the spinal cord starts declining, or the bones starts becoming more and more what do you call it, porous, and you see that you get backaches and all and more challenging things that starts taking place. But if you exercise, you have great personality, you eat well, and so on, you see that the structure of your body that is holding up will become more stronger, because the flow of the energy throughout the body becomes more intensive. So the spinal cord becomes, kind of a really, connectivity of that energy that stimulates all parts of your body. So your cells, your bones, everything becomes more and more stronger as we age. And this is true, especially, for aging people, that the bones become more and more porous, particularly for women. And you see that that's because of the hormonal change. That's why exercise, eating healthy, meditating is really important. So you see that all this happens simultaneously. This all happens simultaneously by the simple practice of ICRMS: introspection, contemplation, reflection, meditation, and that, service, going out and serving, and the brain reinforces that positivity. And this must be coupled with exercises, doing simple asanas, going for a walk, drinking a lot of water, eating a lot of healthy food, and so on. So you see that that combination strengthens all parts of the brain. And when they start firing, there is an interconnectivity between all of them. They reinforce one another. So, so we see this happening, and this is what the great saints and sages were experiencing. They were very, very disciplined with their food, with their exercises, with their meditation. They would not give in to this, they would not give excuses to pursuing the ICRMS, right? They will continue to do this because they see this as core to a healthy body, healthy brain, healthy mind, sharper intellect, that gives them greater insights into the creator, the creation, and themselves, and the interrelationship between all of them. So this is documented in many of the scriptures, right, by great saints that documented in their own ways. Maybe they may not have the scientific language, but they know this was happening in them. Mahan tried to document this. I think in page 225, he speaks about the brain. And that's where I picked up the idea. I said, something is, my guru spoke about this. I need to look at this a little bit more carefully. And true enough, there's a lot of scientific literature that shows this. So we see this practice is more important than anything in our lives. When people give excuses for this, uh, nature will excuse us from all the goodness in our life. So this is, again, I won't go into detail. There are, things within our body, particularly that, when we do this, there are structural changes in our brain that reinforces our hormone systems, our endocrinal systems, and that has an impact on how we digest food, how we convert the food into energy, how do we metabolize things, and how do we get rid of it from our systems. So what we see here is that the introspection, contemplation, reflection, meditation is important for the health of the brain. All the 12 parts of the brains will fire optimally, as we intensify, and we should be intensifying this as we age, right? So we see that this ICRM has an impact on the 12 parts of our brains, right? And that leads to several things. And this is what the great saints and sages were documenting. Even Mahan, what were the outcomes that they were experiencing? They feel healthy. They feel energetic. They're able to do work. Even when they're aging, they're still able to continue the thinking and the introspection. They're not vegetating, sitting in front of the TV, just watching, but they're thinking deeply. They are writing, they're, talking and, sharing, right? It's an active life, not an inactive life, not a passive life, right? So they were energetic, right? So that structural change in the brain was helping them to become more and more, the mental stamina and the stamina that they get helps them build that endurance. That endurance, now the hardware is getting better, right? They see that now the software that is functioning because of the hardware becomes more stronger and more powerful. So the physical capital becomes stronger, the physical body that we have becomes stronger. That helps us build the mind that is really strong and powerful and resilient, right? So the powerful mind is that a mind that is not impacted by this material world out there. It is not easily fragmented. There are some people that, a small problem, they're unable to cope. They may look hard, but they are like porcelain. When you drop it, it shatters. But your mind here becomes like a flexible mind. It can bend, but come back to its original state. It's like a rubber ball. You throw it on the wall, it bounces back. For a while, it dents, and then that dent pushes it back to its original form. This is how the mind becomes, right? Becomes agile, resilient. That strong mind that is able to sift out what makes the mind shrunken, what makes the mind depressed, what makes the mind, weak, it is able to sift out. Why? Because it inherits a quality called viveka, ability to discriminate between what is, makes the mind weaker and the mind stronger. It gives the ability to understand what is real and what is unreal, right? It gives the ability to understand what is finite and what is infinite, what is mortal and what is immortal. So that ability, the clarity becomes, phenomenal. This is what Mahan said, Arivin, Arival, Arivin, Telivu, the clarity, the Telivu is clarity. So the intellect becomes more sharper and deeper, right? And that intellect is the source of, making sense of things, pursuing, in a more systematic, logical, scientific way, and get rid of dogmatic systems that have got no logic behind it. So the intellect becomes much more stronger and sharper and deeper. as I said, that leads to clarity of thought. Complex things become very simple. Complicated things become more easier, right? Our creativity goes up. Then it may be complex, but we become creative to unpack that complexity and to be able to figure out things and make sense of the complexity and help address those complexity with simple ways. And this is what that starting with the introspection, contemplation, reflection, and meditation does. The clarity of thought teaches us how to look after our body, our brain, how to look after our mind, what we need to stimulate the intellect to go deeper, find creative ways to reinforce all of this. That leads us to an enlightened state of existence. We are able to understand the creative forces. We're able to understand the creator itself. We're able to understand who we are. And we're able to trace back our DNA back to that creator and the creation process. And when we do that, we have a fantastic understanding of who we are. We're able to have a fantastic understanding of what is the gross body that is continuously changing, what is the subtle body that we have, which is transcendental, and what is the causal body that is an interface between the gross body and the subtle body, the mind. And we learn then the mind is a powerful tool to lead us to the God realization state, or can be so weak to shatter and destroy everything because of the ignorance and unillumined state. So when the mind practices introspection, contemplation, reflection, and meditation, it acquires the tools. It acquires the tools to understand the gross body and its limitations, and understand the power and the strengths and the transcendentality and the universality of the subtle body, and realize that the mind is actually the subtle body in different forms. For an unillumined person, the mind is the body. When anything happens to the body, the mind also is impacted. But through this inquiry, you realize that the mind is actually a manifestation of this subtle body, which is actually the DNA of the creator. So when the mind gets illumined by it, the mind attains infinite possibilities and infinite potentialities and becomes really powerful and not impacted by the sugha and dukkha cycles, not impacted by, the space and time continuum, not impacted by the karmic forces, the cause and effect forces. And it remains in that state of, though it is in the material with all its limitations, is not touched by the limitations. And that is what enlightened state of existence. But coming back to where we started, it started off with that meditational experiences of the great saints and sages. They use the mind as a laboratory for analysis, like how the scientists use the microscope and the telescope. The inner scope was the human mind that became the center of exploration. And they realized that the human mind, the interface between the gross body to experience the material world, and the interface to that spiritual body, which is transcendental to the bodily space-time. So the mind is the interface between the two. And that became the focus of the research and exploration. That became the laboratory of analysis. And when they understood that mind, they were able to then see the forces that impact the human mind. When they understood the forces that impact the human mind, then they mastered the forces that impacted the human mind. they were able to then, when they master it, they're able to use that force, life force, to understand life itself and the source of the life, which is the creator itself. So they traced, so the mind followed the DNA back to the creator and realized, aha, I am God in a different form that helps me understand and experience this wonderful space-time continuum, which is also the manifestation of the Creator. What a wonderful exploration this great Mahans have, discovered, that the interface between the object and the subject, right? That interface was the source of their experimentation, exploration, and that became their laboratory of analysis. And this is what our great Mahan has shown us. And as I trace this back, I say, wow, he talked about this human mind that is the source of everything. He says the discovery of the universe happened in the human mind. The telescopes and the microscopes all happen in the human mind. Even God, the concept of God, emanated from the human mind, which means that the human mind had that fragments in the DNA of the divinity itself. You start there. If you start there, you will end there. So with this, I want to tell you that this great Mahan has shown us this path to this highway to infinity through this practice of meditation. And by the way, what is really fascinating is that the great scientists in the top universities in the world, through their own exploration, using their laboratories and scientific analysis, have come to the same thing. There are articles that show that when you practice meditation, you transcend the space-time continuum, you feel the transcendental nature, you become more universal, you become more altruistic, you become more kinder. All this happens because of the structural changes that this simple practice helps us. So with that, I want to end today, and the next class, I hope this gives you a good insights into the power of the human mind. And if we are able to understand the human mind, we're able to master the forces of this universe. And I hope all of you all will take this practice as the most important practice in your life. Because if you did this, everything else you'll be able to master everything else. So with that, may the force be with you, and I wish you all the best. And we will have further chats to see if you have any other questions and comments that we can address in this satsang. So thank you very much, and we will continue next week again on the same topic. Thank you.